The candidates tournament has got off to a superb start. It's been such an absorbing round. In this video, I'd like to look at the game between Fabiano Caruana and Hikaru Nakamura. What a great start. So the two US rivals, many have said that they're the favourites to win the tournament, including Magnus Carlsen. And interesting to see how both players would approach this first game. I think Caruana with white, certainly I'm sure he went into the game wanting to press Nakamura, wouldn't want to give away an easy draw, but you know, in the back of his mind also he'd have to think, well, his recent record in classical chess against Nakamura is not particularly good. For Nakamura, well, this is entering the tournament with a real splash because he's hardly played any top-level classical chess over the past year. So, you know, how would it go for him? Well, this game did not disappoint. It was a long game, but fascinating from start to finish. It did not disappoint. So here we go. Fabiano Caruana against Hikaru Nakamura. Caruana started gently with a reti. I don't think he wants to play e4 and go into sort of forcing lines. Here, of course, knight f6 is possible, most likely with a transposition to the Catalan, but Nakamura shows that he wants some imbalance in the position by pushing forward with d4, so now it's a kind of reverse Benoni. And you might recall this position from the World Championship match between Ding and Gukesh. There it went knight f6 and d3 and e3, and if you remember, well, Ding won a splendid game, but that didn't happen. It went bishop c5 from Nakamura, so just creating a strong point on d4. And knight e7, that's because later on he might want to bring the knight to f5 to support a piece on d4. In fact, that happened. And this is normal, or at least this has been played before, knight c3. But instead of that, Caruana played knight takes d4. And this is a novelty, but looking at the game with Stockfish 18, you can see that this is the first choice of Stockfish. So knight takes, and then b4. Now that's a really intriguing move from Caruana. Obviously preparation. You see, if white takes here, then black has excellent control over d4. You don't want that. So this shakes black's control by playing b4. That gets taken, and e takes d4, so material is now even. It would be a massive mistake to take that pawn because of a check on a4. So castles, queen b3. Still not advisable to take here because that would leave black's queen trapped. So bishop a5, knight c3, and knight f5. So you can see the point of putting the knight to e7 to come to f5 to get in on d4. That's the weak square. Bishop a3 hits the rook, rook e8, d5, and that knight flew into d4, and b6. So it's a slightly unusual position with this knight in the middle of the board. White's pieces look very good. I do like these bishops sort of slicing across the board. Now, white should not be greedy here. If pawn takes pawn, bishop takes, don't take that rook. That would not be very clever because then there's a huge attack against the king. And here's where Caruana thought for a very long time and finally came up with rook e1. So it was clear this is a prepared line, but he wasn't that familiar with it. But this is a good move. And Hikaru also played well, pushing the queen back and then playing c5. So certainly white does not want to take here. You see, when black has such good control over there, that's a very clear advantage to black. Excellent control over the d4 square. So after c5, this bishop is just blunted. So Caruana put it back on b2 to, start to challenge the knight here. Rook b8, stepping away from the bishop. a4, yeah, I mean black basically wants to break with b5 to undermine the d5 point. And Caruana's pieces the major pieces are a bit clogged up here. So he took and played knight d5. So the knight is on an excellent square and also opens up the bishop. And this is actually a very important moment in the game. It's possible to break with b5 here. But Nakamura went for queen d6, so it looked like he was sort of trying for a bit more than just simplifying the position. But Caruana exchanged here. That knight had to go. And rook e4. Now it's game on. And, well, Nakamura made a relatively quick decision here. We're on move 22. So time was not an issue for either player. Caruana had invested a little bit more time. Nakamura just exchanged on d5. But instead of that, he could have played d3. So that pawn is rather awkward. So it's important that white picks it up. And then he could break with b5, undermining the knight on d5. I should stress this did not happen. So black's bishops have real potential here, actually. This is a computery line, but according to the computer, this is best play. Now, in this position, white is a pawn up. I mean, that pawn on d2 certainly isn't going anywhere for a long time. But black's bishops look excellent. And the computer assessment is roughly level. I mean, when black has these beautiful bishops, it's hard to imagine that white can really exploit this pawn, basically. So that d3 would have kept more tension in the position. But Nakamura exchanged bishop for knight very quickly. As I said, about 3.5 minutes, relatively quickly. But after this gives white hope. That bishop is such a powerful piece. Looking at f7, often a weak point, and just compare the bishops. Well, Nakamura brought this one to a more active square, so it can travel back here, although it's not hitting anything. h4, good move. Now the computer says this position is roughly level. But I look at this and I think white has much more potential than black. You've got to get it right with black in order to equalise the position. Now, Nakamura played a5 quite quickly. That kind of secures the queen side, but actually it wastes time, and there's no time to waste on the king side. It would have been better to play g6 to try and block with h5. Now, you've got to be careful because this bishop looks at the pawn, but if this, okay, f7 threatened, now you've got to do something about the pawn and then go h5. And that secures the position, secures the king side. White can still try to make something of this position, but black should be all right here. But a5 loses a move, and now it starts to get difficult. So nothing is happening on the e file for black because that's threatened. Queen f6. I mean, Nakamura would love to have an exchange of queens here, even at the cost of damaging the pawn structure. But no. When you've got opposite colour bishops, then whoever's attacking has a clear advantage because it's impossible to exchange off that beautiful bishop on d5, a multicoloured bishop on d5. There we go. Again, it's possible for black to defend this if you're willing to compromise. So the machine recommends g6 with the idea h5. And if h5, then queen f5. So it's not a beautiful pawn structure, but exchanging queens would offer the best chance. But instead, bishop c5. And after h5, this is starting to look pretty bad. I mean, it's notable that, at this stage, Caruana, well, he's invested more time. And coming up to the time control at move 40, we're on move 31. Caruana had to speed up a bit, whereas Nakamura had like 20 minutes left, something like that. He wasn't in any time pressure. Of course, avoid the exchange of queens. Now, the question is, how do you bring that rook into play? You can't bring it into play on the e file, obviously. Could conceivably come up to the 4th rank and find its way along here. But Caruana goes for bishop c6. Good move. Keep it simple. Push the rook away and then rook e1. And lo and behold, white controls the open file. And then the queen comes in. And this is already looking absolutely on the edge for black. I mean, black can lose very, very quickly if you're not careful. If this queen gets in on h7, it's game over. The king comes back to g8 and bishop e4. So already, Nakamura is suffering here. We're on move 36, by the way. Now, not possible to exchange because g7 just drops. Rook d8. I mean, Nakamura is reduced to just shuffling here. Queen e4, looking to get in. King g8, queen f5. So he wants to play bishop e4 and then it's game over. So queen d7. And Caruana, I think absolutely correctly, just brings the queen back. You could exchange queens and bring the rook in. And then do this. This is why the pawn on h5 is so strong, because black's king is in trouble. Here, white is going to win a pawn. I mean, this is practically Zugzwang. Black can't hold this position together. But you could play rook d6, play like this. Now, of course, white has winning chances here. Whether it's definitely a win is very hard to say. So Caruana was absolutely correct. You just don't need to do that. Black is begging for exchanges here. Just better to keep the tension. So rook f8 guards this one. Rook e5. Now the rook is starting to motor. Rook f5. So black is tied to defending this. And, various plans come to mind. I mean, that's an obvious one. If you can push g4, g5, crack open the g file, the king could be just toast on g8. Queen e7. Okay, that covers g5. Queen g4. There's a bit of shuffling. By the way, we're now past the time control. This is move 42. So then half an hour gets added to the clock, and they get 30 seconds increment each time they make a move. So this rook looking to come to e4, conceivably, but bishop e4, still looking to get in. Yeah, if queen f5 here, then in fact this one is okay for black because the king can step to e7 and is covered by these pieces. So rook f5. The great thing about white's position is that you can shuffle around till, till you're blue in the face, and black doesn't know which side he's going to be hit on. I mean, it's just such a beautiful position to play. When I've been fortunate enough to get a position like this with opposite colour bishops and you're hitting pawn on f7, I've always had long games, but I have very, very good memories of this kind of position. It's just a joy to play. Queen c7. Right, I think it's time that I had a break. Time for you to do some thinking. Time for me to do some drinking. So, white to play. What would you do next? I've seen many chessboards in my life, but when I heard about this one, I was keen to see it for myself. It's beautiful and completely wireless, thanks to an integrated battery and Bluetooth connection. For my edition, I wanted pieces that reflect clarity. When I play with them, everything feels natural. Just me, the board, and the game I love. This is my supreme chess set, the Daniel King edition. Did you spot that there's a tactic in this position? Caruana decided to cash in. He took on f7. And then played bishop d5. Obviously, there's only one move for black here, otherwise you lose your queen. And then queen g4. So white regains the material and ends up a pawn up. Now, it's not clear to me whether Nakamura overlooked this tactic. I was watching the game and, he was just sort of playing quite quickly. Maybe he just bargained that, well, might have lost a pawn, but at least he's exchanged rooks. And if there's an exchange of queens, then maybe the opposite colour bishop endgame could be a draw. So I don't know whether he allowed this or whether he overlooked this. Let's just go back to the position here. So here's where Nakamura played queen c7 and allowed this tactic. The question is, what happens if he just defends with rook f8? Well, this is extremely difficult for black. So, one thing that white can do is simply take a pawn. By the way, queen a4, queen f5 doesn't look too good. So rook d5, queen c8, and you don't have to grab the first pawn, but you could just play rook takes pawn here, and then just carry on. You reset with bishop here and then move the rook away. Or you could play rook d6. Now that is a serious pawn to take, and then just keep shuffling in. This is absolutely horrible. So it's quite possible that Nakamura saw this tactic and thought, fine, at least it relieves a bit of the pressure. So this is the game continuation, and they reached this position. So I think the reason Caruana cashed in, that he felt it was worth exchanging rooks to do this, is because black's king is so exposed, and in practical terms it makes life just a bit easier for white in a sense. So you could say that both sides gain from this, and he's still got pressure. If the queen moves away, it's checkmate on e8. And yeah, bishop shuffles back to beautiful d5 square. And the queen is having a great time. But everything is protected. Now this is an intriguing moment. So we're on move 62. I wouldn't say that either player was in huge time pressure. From memory, they had something like, 10 to 15 minutes left. And remember, they get 30 seconds increment per move. Now, Nakamura decided to go back with the king. So just, hanging tough. I thought he might have made a dash with the king. Now, this is still very, very promising for white. However, it's a kind of non-standard position. The machine likes this, by the way, for white, and thinks that white should play like this, and the attack should be too strong. But this is tricky, and it's non-standard. You've got to be creative to win this. So I'm surprised that Nakamura didn't go for it. I think that heading back like this somehow is easier for white to play. Caruana still has control here. And as he's in control, then he feels the moment is right to advance on the king side just very steadily. And it is promising. So we're on move 71 here, queen e4. So why is Caruana offering exchange of queens? Well, we're going to see why in a second. But if Nakamura avoids this, then the problem is that white's king is just going to advance into the position. And steadily, this is close to Zugzwang, drive the queen out of the way and bring the king to c6, and basically black is going to collapse here. So I'm not surprised that Nakamura exchanged. Caruana did this because it improves his pawn structure on the king side. So now he's got these two beautiful pawns and can advance through the middle. And the d pawn isn't an issue because that's securely blockaded by the bishop. In fact, sometimes it's nice to keep that pawn on d4 as it can block this diagonal. Anyway, more on that in a second. g4. So, simple plan. Advance this wonderful pawn majority on the king side. And there are various ways to go here. You can push with g5, that's strong. Caruana went for f5, also strong. Caruana had something like 2 minutes left at this point, maybe 2.5. So he has got 30 seconds each time he moves. But he was getting down to the wire. Nakamura had more time. And at this point, Caruana rushed it. He played f6. He should just take on d4, and slowly he's going to crawl in and make a break on the king side. This is going to be winning. Okay, let me just show you a typical variation. You can see that white is still in complete control here. The king comes in. Basically it's Zugzwang. And now g5 is a really nice move, which just splits black. A very typical sack for these kind of positions. If bishop takes g5, then king takes b6, and now you've got passed pawns, or potential passed pawns on two sides of the board. And if pawn takes pawn, you sack another and play bishop e2. So these two are going nowhere, and the bishop will come here, and you play f6, and you can see those pawns are going through. It's very neat, but not too difficult. Very typical for these kind of opposite colour bishop endgames. But f6 by Fabi takes e6 check. He thought this was winning, but this should be a draw. Okay, if you want to pause the video and think how you would play this with black, I would say they probably were playing. They'd been playing maybe well over 5 hours at this point. So it's a long game. We're on move 80, and a very tough game actually for both players. Okay, black to play and draw. The drawing move is counterintuitive. It's to step away from that passed pawn. Okay, why? Well, if e7, you can drag the king out of the way and take on b6, but actually in this position, the king comes over and it's not possible to make progress. For example, okay, another way, bishop f5. Okay, this looks very dangerous. But d3 is an important move. So if that's taken, then here, king c6 and bishop f2. You see, once that diagonal is open, once the pawn is gone, then black just has a blockade here. No way in for white. And if e7, d2, you make a queen, black makes a queen, and this should be a draw. I mean, white can still maybe press a bit with this one, but it should be a draw basically. So yes, the counterintuitive king c7 should be a draw. But once again, Nakamura rushed it. He played king e7. And then he realized that this was a simple win. Notice the pawn is blockaded. That bishop cannot get back to cover b6. And this pawn is just going through with the support of the king. After bishop e1, c5, Nakamura, shaking his head, resigned the game. An extraordinary conclusion. Now, I think justice was done there because I think Fabiano was in control for most of that game. And I think that Nakamura made a very, very poor decision at this point. And, well, even a move before as well. You know, he could have gone for b5 here as well. But I think it was a poor decision to head for this opposite colour bishop endgame, even though this was still probably tenable. But he slipped very quickly into a poor position. Now, it was a long game, and, well, as Caruana said afterwards, you know, the tiredness can get to you. So Fabi rushed it at the end when he was a bit short of time. Nevertheless, it feels to me like justice was done there. That's the final position. Wow. Just an extraordinary game. And I think for Fabiano Caruana, that lays a few ghosts to rest, really. You know, because his form against Nakamura recently in classical games hasn't been brilliant. So that has some significance for him to win. For Nakamura, well, you know, I've mentioned this before the tournament, that there is a massive difference between Blitz and Rapid and classical chess. You know, in Blitz and Rapid, he might have got away with some of these quick decisions because it puts the pressure on your opponent. And Fabiano did run short of time here. But classical chess is so different from Blitz and Rapid. You know, sometimes it pays to invest 20, 30 minutes on one decision. And it seems to me that Nakamura simply didn't do that. So, before we move on, let's just have a quick look at tomorrow's pairings. We've got Yesipenko against Nakamura. So, both players lost. We've got Giri against Caruana, another very intriguing one. Wei Yi against Pragnananda. And Sindarov against Bluebaum. See you soon.